That night, the snow came thick and thicker, heavy and wet, and piling up so quickly that Turner could watch it mound itself up from his bedroom window. It was the first real snowstorm of the winter, and he imagined the snow lying hip-deep across Phippsburg, down Parker Head, across the granite ledges, and on the smoldering piles of the houses on Malaga Island. He imagined it sweeping all the way down to Pownell, and he thought of Lizzie looking out a window, her head in her hands, missing the sounds of the New Meadows tides, missing her granddaddy, missing Malaga, missing him. And he knew that he would have to get down to Pownell to free her himself. But the snow never let up through the night. The snow never let up through the next day, and when the clouds finally shredded themselves and the silvered moon looked down upon Phippsburg again, it looked down upon a town strangely changed, its shed turned into hills, its woodpiles into igloos. Parker Head had become a curved slope lolling easily and lazily up against houses and over fences, leaving a bare patch now and again to show just how high the snow had reached. It had sloped up so high onto Mr. Newton's house that when Turner got there the next morning, Mr. Newton had crawled out the second-story window and was shoveling off the roof of his porch. Turner, who had been up not long after the first light and had shoveled off his own porch and steps and walkway, then had gone on down to shovel the porch and steps and walkway of Mrs. Cobb's house, hollered up to ask if Mr. Newton had another shovel. Soon he was clearing the porch and watching the sheets of cascading snow Mr. Newton pushed down from the roof above him. Together they cleared the steps and the short walk out to the road. By the time they were finished, the walls of snow rose above Turner's shoulders, and he had to pitch the snow so high that his arms were starting to ache. Afterward, they went into the store, and Mr. Newton stoked the wood stove. "Don't know why, won't be anyone out on such a day," he observed. He went in the back to the brewed coffee and brought it out in 2 mugs. Turner cupped his hands around his, and they sat silently together for a time, feeling the warmth of the wood stove and of the coffee thawing their frozen selves. "You haven't asked me yet," said Mr. Newton. "Sir?" "What you came to ask. You haven't asked me to take you down to Pownell." "Will you take me down?" "That's why you came to shovel me out?" "Maybe so." Mr. Newton laughed, a laugh that probably would have been loud had any sound come out. But he laughed with no sound at all, his mouth open, his eyes watering some, his ample belly moving up and down, until finally he drew in his breath, gathered himself together, and took another gulp of his coffee. "I suppose it's good to be honest if you're a minister's son." "I'm not a minister's son anymore." Mr. Newton reached over and laid his hand on Turner's knee. "You'll always be a minister's son. You'll be a minister's son until you take your last breath in God's sweet world. Now, there's a load down to the textile mill in Brunswick that's been waiting for me to pick up this last week. And after that, there's a fellow down to Yarmouth who still has some of last year's syrup to sell, and I'm all out. I figure if you come along and help me load, we'll be able to make it down to Pownell, too." "I'll help load," said Turner. "Whenever you're ready to go, I'll be ready." "Well, you talk to your mother about it, and we'll need to wait until I roll the roads, and until we have a clear day." "I'll tell my mother." "And Turner, what I mean to say is, I don't want you to be too disappointed about what you might find there." "I'll be ready when you are, Mr. Newton," he said, and he finished his coffee.